So today we're going to look at the three kingdoms of nature, the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, which you might say is a sort of edge into Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science, because we're looking at something a little bit more, as we say, a little bit more than what you see just physically. Now, wait a minute, it needs to be turned on. Yeah. So, yeah, just sort of a background into how Rudolf Steiner, again, sees the world. He sees this an era, a space where, you know, that most of us are most conscious of the earthly created physical material world. This is the total focus of the modern materialist. That's everything there, you know, that everything we do is based on the genes and things that and hormones and all the physical substance in your body. You're just totally a product of that, would be the picture that coming from materialists. And there's these two other realms that hardly recognize, despite that they have to be in here in order to be able to recognize that. But that seems to be a jump too much. So there's, you might say, let's go to the other end, the spiritual worlds, a world of that, you might say, this is the world of ideas, amongst many other things. That, you see, the things that we can know of that don't have an actual physical basis. And you begin to see that everything that you can see in the physical world also has, as were, an archetype, an idea. Now, for instance, we've looked at things like a square. Now, that's a physical representation of a square. But really, a square, if you think you say, what is a square? And then you begin to say, yes, it's something that has four sides, and there's straight lines, and there's corners, four corners that are exactly equal. You see, these are all ideas, and that's only an approximation. It's a representation. It's actually not really a square, but it can remind you of a square. And it's this whole realm of this spiritual world is, you might say, the lowest edge of the spiritual world. And it's interesting that, from a long time ago, people were much more aware of the spiritual world than they were of the physical world. And you can see there's been a certain element that mankind has almost had to go through a stage of forgetting about the spiritual worlds in order to actually focus on living here on earth. And then you have to say, well, there's a certain task that humankind has in being on earth. They're going to achieve something that you can't if you're busy saying, oh, I want to return to nirvana, release me from this life on earth. In other words, instead of getting engaged, they think, oh, I just want to go back again. So there's been a kind of stage of forgetting of this, and it's got to the stage that it's now almost totally forgotten. It's interesting, that's when Rudolf Steiner comes in, 19th century, the height of materialism. That was sort of, and so that he comes almost, you say, like to sort of initiate the bounce, as it were, the return. But it's not a bounce where you leave the earth again. You need to have your feet on the earth and again open up so that you can be standing here in the physical material world with all its experiences, and then open yourself again to a spiritual world. And so, perhaps in the early 19th century,
I just wanted to clarify. One of the things you just said was when you were talking about the square, you said it's just the edge of the spiritual world. Does it mean the world of ideas?
And the ideas, I mean, there's much bigger things in the spiritual world than just ideas of squares and triangles and circles.
But you're generally speaking of the world of ideas.
Yeah, but it's not only the world of ideas, it's much bigger things as well. And this word Devakan, Deva means spirit and Kan means home of the spirit. So that's it's a term that Rudolf Steiner used in his early lectures because he was speaking to the Theosophists. So you find he has a lot of language in early lectures that speak theosophical theosophicalese, if you might say, that over that time, and then gradually he begins to change these names. I think that's where he used the etheric body, I think, came from that era, and then later on he talks about life body, which is perhaps more descriptive in English anyway, and presumably in German. And perhaps in the early 19th century they could still speak of God. And people like Darwin and all those, they were really quite religious people and had a strong feeling for God. But it's interesting, you take this word God, it's in the singular. And it's and no wonder people feel it's totally inadequate to actually describe what they feel. So they, as it were, this is my opinion, they can almost say, oh, well, it's because it's inadequate, I just can't believe it. And I think this is my biggest problem with the word God. It's too small. It doesn't say enough. That there are many more beings in these spiritual worlds. And later on we'll look at what Rudolf Steiner wasn't only him, but 9 ranks of hierarchies of different levels of higher spiritual beings, and we're the 10th. So it's saying, it's a very populated realm, the spiritual world, as he makes a picture of it. In fact, he says almost that for every human being, it says that out of those 9, the 9th level is he calls the angels, and it says every human being has as a companion an angel, a guardian angel. Well, that means if that's just the 9th hierarchy, as many as there are people in the world, then the spiritual worlds must be pretty populous because there's only one of 9 ranks. So, and you might say everything that has a presence in the world, as it were, has a spiritual archetype behind it. And in a certain sense that everything in the spiritual worlds also has, you might say, a mark. It is somewhere it has been active in the physical world, and you can kind of make a link. But you might say that is the further development of spiritual science, is to make those links between the spiritual world and our physical world. And so we have these 2 extremes, and in between, I'll say that also for us, that we have something in our being, the part that we will say I to, you feel that lives within the body, comes out of the spiritual world, but has created itself a home in the physical world. And you can say that all the other higher ranks of spiritual beings, that the hierarchies, like the angels, they don't have a physical body as such. It's only the human beings, and the human beings have a physical body because they're going to have a certain task, a certain possibilities they have by having a physical body. We can be in a world where we can be independent. And you can have a feeling that if you're in the spiritual world, the influence of the higher beings can be telling you what to do. The thing that human beings, they can come into this world and shut off to the spiritual world, say, I'm going to do my own thing, which is an interesting situation. And of course you have to bear the consequences of that, something called karma. But Yes, so there's an interesting situation that other beings haven't had. They're sort of like the human beings the first time. They've created a special world where human beings can live in a physical body and be independent. And you might say they reached the height of independence in the 19th century by saying, well, I don't even believe in these other people, these other realms, that there's nothing to do with me. So that's that element. And then here in between, as it were, there's a space, the soul realm. Now this is, how can we put it? It's like we have this physical body and the spirit here, and it's somewhere in the soul realm is to do with how this spirit here can experience all that comes through the physical body, and that comes through the senses. For us it's important that we've got, eyes and ears, nose and taste, and a number of other different senses which we'll look at, that these things, as it were, we can become aware of through the senses, and the spirit then has to sort of connect with that. And this place where it connects is what we call the soul. And what happens in the soul are three aspects of thinking, feeling, and willing. Those are you might say, the activities of the soul. And we have this interesting situation that each of us has a soul, and we on earth then form communities of souls. And that we're here in a room with other souls, and that's a whole aspect of our experience, is not to live alone, but to live with other souls. This is all sounding. And so this is sort of an in-between world. Between heaven and earth, the human being and their soul lives. And so in a way, this is just summarizing at the human situation of spirit, which belongs to their body, which is part of the earthly world, and the soul is where those two meet. We'll come back to this, and so gradually we can build on this picture. There. Morning verses. This is just to say, just a little bit to contrast the two verses where they begin. With the younger children begin with the sun with loving light. It's not about me, but around me is the sun and the light, and it's a wonderful place I live in. You can sort of feel there. And then there's a change around 9 years old, and there's a different, I come as it were, I really feel myself in here, and I look out. I look into the world before it is the world makes a beautiful place for me. Quite a different gesture. I look into the world wherein there shines the sun, wherein there gleam the stars, wherein there lie the stones. The plants, they live and grow. The beasts, they feel and live. And man to spirit gives a dwelling in his soul. So these are quite profound little verses that Rudolf Steiner gives to begin the day. And each day begins with these verses being said in New Zealand, and spread around the world. These verses are being said again and again and again until they get right around, until they get to Hawaii. And then the next day begins. It's interesting that this sort of consciousness, I don't know to what extent children will carry the consciousness, but by saying it, there will be something that comes through. So, we've said in the verse there that about looking into the world, and you might say, as a child perceives the world, initially a child, and for any of us, the world is undifferentiated. When you first come in as a little baby, it's just, you hear and you open your eyes and everything is just, it's all mixed up together. There's no differentiation at all. It's just, there's a busy world around with noise and light and smells and warmth and all those sort of things. It's all there and we don't differentiate. And then later, as you're going a little bit older, there's these, you begin to make some differentiation. You differentiate between light and dark, or day and night. You'll differentiate things. Some things are warm and some things are cold. It's noisy or quiet. Touch, it's rough or smooth. Taste, sweet or sour. Of course, there are others as well. And smell, fragrant or putrid. It's interesting, we have, when you do to colour, you've got a rainbow of colours. Okay, what's the rainbow of those tastes? What's the rainbow going from fragrant to putrid? And it's interesting, we have some areas we have lots of words for, but some areas we don't. What are some other words, for instance, for smell? Other kinds of smells. How many words for smells have we got other than yuck and fantastic or something? But no, real words. Can anyone just say some other words that describe a smell?
Pungent.
Pungent.
Aromatic.
Aromatic, yes.
Sharp.
Sharp. It's getting a little bit into the smell, other taste.
Yeah, I think that we use a lot of words that...
Yes, they kind of get mixed up, yes.
Light.
Light, yeah.
Bacchus. A light smell.
Stale. Stale.
Stale. Yeah, yes, okay. Stale, yes. Acrid would be another word. That something's been burning and gets into your nose, acrid. But we don't have a huge range of things, which is strange because there's one thing you can't stop is smells. You can't say, I just not got to smell anything today, and do that for about a minute, and it's interesting that smells take you back to your earliest memories. You know what? When you're selling a house, what you do? You bake bread. It sort of takes you back to your grandmother's something, whatever it is. It's amazing how smells just take you back to your earliest, deepest memories. Anyway, other differentiations. You begin to differentiate something as living or as it's lifeless. That is it's changing and growing, or is it fixed? And then between animate and inanimate, moving or still, some of these things, and human or non-human. And so this is a whole list of different things from different senses we have to be able to do that. So the young child is already from the very beginning living through the senses, coming to terms with these senses. So, polarities become a differentiated spectrum here. So light and dark, now you begin to see not just polarities, but a whole sequence. From blinding white, bright, clear, dull, dim, dark, black. Do you see, begin to differentiate out. And I haven't said about colours. Of course, there's a whole range of colours going around a colour circle and so on. Warm and cold. Again, the exterior, searing, that means searing, hot, burning, hot, warm, tepid, cool, cold, freezing. Or noisy and quiet, deafening, loud, noisy, quiet, audible, silent, and maybe a few others in between. So that, yes, this is part of our developing our relationship to our senses. And then, gradually, we become aware of 4 categories. One is a life... Now, I'm not quite sure just when this would actually come about, because it's a gradual awakening to these things. And we can be much more conscious of it. The child can be it can be more in their subconscious, perhaps, rather than their conscious life. But there's a lifeless, inanimate, cold, mineral world. There's a lot of it. Tables, chairs, floor, ceiling, fans, lights, whatever. There's much of it around us. a growing, changing, living plant world. A living, conscious, ensouled animal world. Ensouled, that the animals have a soul, which indicates that they would have some rudimentary aspects of thinking, feeling, and willing. Will certainly have the willing aspect in the sense that they need that in order to simply be able to move. So, animate, what have I got? Living, conscious, soul, animal world. I haven't used the word animate there, conscious. In other words, there's something that in the plant world sort of stands there and is out in the world, and you can feel with the animal world that something has come and it has come in. And so there's an inner world, and that's the big change from there. And then four, and again people have a rather difficulty with actually making the difference between this. So I've tried to put it here, a social, self-aware, purposeful human world, trying to encapsulate some of the things that you might say in the human world that you don't find in the animal world. Are there other things that you can think of that help differentiate the human being from our brothers and sisters of the animal world? Any other things that when you think about it, what creates it, what brings a difference?
Would emotion be there? Or is
Yeah.
that part of self-aware?
Yeah. Yes, it's part of the emotions. Yes, you become aware of through your feelings. Yes, when ensouled, it's part of the feelings, the emotions, the feelings. Yes, and you can follow on in those thoughts. Yes, Brett?
Kind of on that thought, like emotions about something that isn't present in the moment, or whether it's in the past or the future.
Yes, these memories, being able to hold memories. And that's an interesting question to the degree, what degree do animals have memories? Because they do, but we have, how does ours differ? That an animal, a dog, will remember if it's formed quite a connection with a human being, it'll remember that and really miss it, and when somebody comes back, they'll recall it. So there are certain aspects that there is memory there, but I don't think you could ask a dog, what did you have for breakfast yesterday? That's a whole different kind of conscious memory that we have. Yes, Melissa?
I was thinking about how the memory for humans and memory for humans makes it possible for us to change our behavior. Self-directed.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
You can train them, but they aren't necessarily going to retrain themselves.
Yes.
So they
That's
have memory, but they might not be able to change their behavior based on it. It's reflexive.
Thank you. That's, yes, great point. Thank you.
Supporting that is the ability to see ourselves objectively.
Yeah. Yes, to be able. This is the self-aware. Yeah, seeing yourself objectively.
Sort of in the mirror image forward of memory is imagination, creativity, doing
Yeah.
something different.
Imagination. I tend to use this word imagination in two different ways. Imagination is the ability to form mental pictures. And so that a little bit is, I connect that with the past, that you have different experiences and you can bring memories, you can make a picture. And so that's imagination. I reserve for that same kind of activity for the future, I call fantasy. That when you want to picture what you're going to do, I'd say that is fantasy. You fantasize about what you're planning to do. So it just makes the difference. There's in one sense a similar activity in making mental pictures, but they come from a different direction. And again, we don't know, we can't actually know how much animals are able to create mental pictures. I don't know, maybe some research can discover that, but I think we're able to be much more active in the realm of mental pictures than animals in general would be. Anything
But
else?
the second part of that too, creativity, in other words, working from that picture into actually making something that's not been made.
Yes. Yes. Creativity. Any examples of animal creativity?
Beaver Lodge?
Yes. Is that creativity? It's interesting. Yes, they're certainly creative, but to what degree? Where does it come from? And these things, there's a certain degree of what we call instinct. And you don't need to be taught instinct. It sort of comes. I'll talk later about, and we'll talk about the different levels of will, about instinct, and so it's exploring exactly what you mean by creativity. Yes, David?
Developing the use of tools. Using
Yes.
something as another, for another purpose.
Which comes under the broader thing of problem solving, isn't it? Yes, of using tools. And where can we find the use of tools in animals? I think you find the monkeys would occasionally, but not much, but this sophisticated, our world today, this is a tool, and amount of thinking that's had to go into that. So, and whereas I'm trying to think of other situations. There'll be a few you'll find in the animal world of tools being used. Yes, Jared.
Not just tools, but also innovating other kinds of problem-solving skills. I know that there was an example of a group of primates in Japan who, one innovated taking their sweet potatoes down to the ocean and washing them, and that technology, or that practice dispersed across the entire island, and apparently even jumped over to another island somehow.
Yes, they call it the 100 monkey syndrome. And yes, that's, I'd like to come back to that at another point, this whole thing of not individual learning, but this learning goes up to a higher level. Yeah, it's a fascinating aspect, because of course our whole human culture is based on something like that happening in the human world, that I independently didn't have to go and research everything that belongs to our world, as it were, like coming to birth. You come, as it were, past a whole lot of things. Actually, when you come to birth, you're passing a whole lot of souls that are leaving this world. And you're just amazing, you might say, of young children, how quickly they adapt to our modern world. How many adults have got one of these gadgets? How does this work? And they hand it to a 6-year-old, says, you do the dot, 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 dot. Have you ever had that experience? Where did they get that from? Maybe there was people leaving a kind of transference. I don't know if there's some connection with that. Once something gets into the ether world, as it were, then it sort of is accessible to the whole of that genus. Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things that always remain something of a question. What is going on there that the experience of a few can then be available to the many? Our whole human culture is something, that is so diverse and built up that you get a certain culture. Elephants will have a certain culture, but it's at a very a kind of small stage compared with the great human culture that can be developed. So this whole social, self-aware, purposeful human world as being the fourth. So we're going to look for the moment at these three, and another time we'll look at this question of the human world. When am I going to? 10 o'clock. Okay. So, that was more colourful than the original diagram.
Yes.
So, looking at the mineral world. And it's interesting that here, what I'm showing is that there is certain levels already within the mineral world, even though the mineral is one of them, it also is layered. Here, I can say that in the mineral world, the lifeless world, you have here a kind of solid realm. Here's some crystals and things that are hard. And you can have liquid, which in itself is not alive, that has a lot of life within it. And then you have in the air, the gas, the clouds are a further, the water evaporates. I've got here the solids melt. So there's a kind of mix here that you can imagine that was ice melting to make water, water evaporating to make steam clouds, which of course are actually fine droplets of water, and they're not, the real steam is invisible, but you can't make a picture of something that's invisible, so I've made a cloud instead. And then finally, a level at that would be just pure energy. And for a long time, it's only when Einstein came along and said, mass, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Why the speed of light squared? But there's a relationship between substance and energy, which is a fascinating thing, because it comes. We'll touch back on that when we look at the evolution of the world as Rudolf Steiner pictures it, because in a certain sense, the Big Bang theory sort of ties up with this. And what does that mean? And so also the coming down from energy was hot, condensing, freezing, solid, cold. So there's a whole there's a mini picture in there of all the other things that you have this big picture, and yet here it is kind of repeated on this level, and there's pictures within pictures, and you find this again and again, this many layering of things. So here we have just looking at a plant, and again you can see the qualities of what you might say here is like the solid realm, in one sense, the earth and the roots, and here the leaves, you might say the sap flows in the leaves, and the air flows and goes through there, and there's a whole process of breathing, carbon dioxide in and oxygen out and other things there. And then you might say that you go into the flower, and you can feel here something of light and warmth comes into there. So you can find a kind of differentiation in the flower, and it's sort of mirroring those other qualities below that you had in the mineral world. Later on we'll come here looking at what are the differences between a rose and a rock, and we'll look at that later. Yes, this is not a very adequate diagram. Just say because there's so many different things within in the animal world. This is just one aspect of it. Some animals live on the land, the earth, so that's the earth equality. Some live in the water, and some live in the air. But of course, they are in fact themselves quite they all have solid bodies. It doesn't have just an airy body. And you can find different aspects within it here, that the land animals need to have limbs. In other words, if they didn't have limbs, they would be stuck on the earth. They wouldn't be able to move. So they need to have limbs to get motion. And they have other things as well. And to be living in the sea, you might say that these creatures that, again, animals need to have, I say here, a thorax which is having a backbone, but also a breathing process, that somewhere for animals, that they bring air inside is a very important characteristic. And having a lungs on the inside, you might say that plants really have their lungs turned out. And creatures, human beings, other animals, have the lungs brought in. And it's almost like that for the plant, the consciousness of the plant is quite outside, and then when something in this process brings the consciousness inside, so that the animals have a kind of consciousness through that. And here, the birds are very awake. They have to be very alert. You think of even the eagle would be like a very alert, taking element of the bird life. And so there's something that belongs, there's the head that's awake, the thorax or middle part, which is more connected with dreaming, like the fish are not particularly late. You can sort of feel that they're more in a dream-like. And here, though of course animals can be quite awake, there's something which referring here to limbs, is that in a way we're asleep in our limbs. When I want to pick up something, I kind of have an imagination of it, but imagine if I had to do all this, I'd think, now I want to pick that up. I've got to now lift that up, do this one, put this one in, hold it tight, Imagine if I had to think all that out. I'd be half a day picking that up, wouldn't I? But I don't. I just do it. It's sort of totally unconscious, all that happens. I have an idea, that's what I want to do, and then my limb system simply does it in a quite unconscious way. We have a time of consciousness, when you're learning to write, you get quite conscious about how you just, and then you get to a point where you write and you don't even have to think about it. It just happens. Riding a bike, remember how conscious you have to be at the beginning, trying to work it all out, and then you start riding a bike, you don't have to think about it, just get on, ride. Totally, it's interesting, you learn something, you try and get it into your head, and then you have to get it out of your head. Interesting process, so it becomes unconscious. We'll elaborate on some of these weird ideas later on, because in a way they are weird. Right. How are we getting? 10. How many things did I give you? About quite a few. So, I'm relating these now to the Greek elements. Somebody said the other day, of course, the Chinese have 5 elements, and they don't have... which one is it? They don't have air, but they have wood and metal. No, hang on. Oh, hang on. Sonia, help me out. What are the 5 elements, the Chinese elements?
You said it right.
You did it right, okay. Yeah. But these, because in a way, it connects these ones here. There's this connection here, but also with physical body, etheric body, astral body, and ego. So they sort of bring a kind of comprehensive and fitting together. So if we look at this and we take this a bit further and then we look at different characteristics across there, if you look at the earth realm, its characteristic is that it's rigid. Just imagine if I sat on that chair and it flowed. How useless that would be as a chair. How much we depend on the fact that earthy, solid things are rigid. Water that didn't flow, and sort of. But you see, sometimes we break the earth up finely. Can you give an example where we break the earth up finely so it flows? Gravel. How about in the kitchen?
So people drink bentonite clay. Like when you're cleansing, there's a beverage you can drink that has clay.
Yes, bentonite. Yes, it's perhaps slightly different from what I was meaning. Any of you put salt on your breakfast or anywhere? That's the earth chopped fine so it'll flow, or sugar, or flour, all grind so that it flows because it's made small enough. But generally, the little crystals are quite rigid, so you have to break it up. So it's an interesting, innovative bridging of the two. So water flows, and I've heard, even though that sounds similar, air is mobile, the wind, but air is something that fills a space. If you pour water into something, into a basin, it fits the lower part of the basin. And the top surface is part of a big sphere of the whole earth. Just like in the oceans, they have a great sphere, and they share the center of the earth as its center, and anything else shares that top surface with the earth. But whereas the air in its mobility can just simply fill a space. You can let off something that makes a smell here, and soon it'll fill the whole room. It doesn't just sort of lie on the floor. And finally, you might say the opposite thing here of fire, that it's not only mobile, it's radiant. You're something of, a hot fire, and it just simply radiates out. And perhaps actually the opposite would be here, gravity, which brings things in and radiant out. They're really polar opposites. And remember we talked about, with Goethe, he looked at things like polarities. So gravity is, centripetal, comes into the center, and radiant is something goes out, it's centrifugal, wants to go out. Totally opposite. And you need to be able to work with these polarities, and then you can begin to feel the whole dimensions of the world we live in. So again, taking other things related, earthly things are contracted and dense, as well as being rigid. Water is still contracted. When ice melts, it actually gets smaller, but most other things expand slightly, but they're still really quite dense and sort of contained. There's a certain volume. But when you take the water and then, in this case, allow it to evaporate or boil, the steam just expands. It's expansive. And whereas we've said that the earth is dense, you might say fire and energy is insubstantial. And going on these other things, solid, it has its own shape and boundaries. A crystal is not dependent on things around it, but water takes the shape of the container at the bottom, and air fills the container. It doesn't sort of sit down the bottom, it's equally all over, right throughout. I don't know if you can imagine what your tires would be like if on your car you fill them with air, if the air was only at the bottom. Well, actually I suppose that's all right because that's the part that meets the road. But it sort of fills it evenly. And with energy, it permeates everything with warmth. Everything has warmth permeating through it. The solid thing's own center of gravity. Liquid, it doesn't have its own center of gravity, it shares that of the earth, except when you agitate it enough and it goes in little drops, and then it's an image of the earth, a little round image of the earth. Air is lightly affected by gravity. If it wasn't, our atmosphere would just disappear out into space and we'd be left with nothing. So it has a little bit of gravity that holds it. This atmosphere is held nearer to the earth. So the first 100 kilometers or so is where 99% of the atmosphere is. And energy is totally unaffected by gravity. And going down here between these two, melting, liquid to gas is boiling or evaporating, and going back, condensing and freezing. Those are the processes of change of state. And right up here, Einstein's relationship for energy and matter, which is most shown there. So that's something for physicists to sort of try and expand their mind a little bit. This is saying something similar again, but with the Greek elements. Again, here the human being, okay, peculiar to the human being is something of the fire element, the ego. You see, with the animals, their ego is outside, it's not inside, but for us, we're able to incarnate our ego. With, you might say, for the animals, they have an ego, which is like an animal group soul, but it's not in, it's sort of in more outside in the heavenly or astral worlds. And so with the animal, they have an astral body, the plants have an etheric body, and the minerals just have a physical body. They don't have the others. So a plant has mineral and for physical and etheric. The animals have physical, etheric, and astral, and human beings have all four. If you see the Greek elements, they had an interesting way of looking at it. They had two polarities, and they said the polarities were something is either hot or it's cold, and is either dry or it's moist. And so if you mix those together, you can say, well, earth is cold and dry, water is cold and moist, air is hot and moist, and fire is hot and dry. It's sort of that's the sort of way of kind of seeing the whole of creation put into four quarters. Here, looking at this realm here, in the solid. Now, in the solid realm is where people who are trying to identify substances, they try and make them solid. Because something, when it crystallizes, it has a unique crystal form, and it has electrical properties and thermal properties that are quite unique. So that when something comes into the physical mineral state, it is it has huge things. You can identify something quite precisely, and so this is interesting. This uniqueness and variety, a huge variety of things there, and it's interesting, I think, is that in our state that we've gone through coming from a spiritual world down into gradually into things so that we have finally a physical body. We're having a physical body. We can express our individuality through the fact we have a physical body. We can express it. Whereas when something is solid, is melted, it already begins to lose some of its uniqueness. And then it's interesting when some things then take more that you melt them and they evaporate, they suddenly have not a uniqueness, but they have what's called a universal gas law. You know, those who have studied physics, PV equals KT, pressure times volume is equal to a constant times the absolute temperature. That works for all gases, no matter their origin. And so it's interesting, here you have uniqueness, everything is individual, here there's something universal. And here there's again this energy state from Einstein. I said those before, radiant, expansive, fluid, crystalline. Here the mobility, it's still or rigid. Here there's a viscous flow. Here, if you talk about mobility, you can talk about the speed of sound. What's that, about 600-700 miles an hour, I think it is. And I'm trying to think what it is but it's in miles. And then, with energy, the speed of light, which is so enormous, it's and there's all sorts of questions about what you mean by speed of light. So, fourfoldness, we're going to have to stop on some of this. Here's the four Greek elements: earth, water, air, light, fire, warmth. And see how you can find within the plant, earth, seed and roots, water, stem and leaves, air, the bud and flower, and warmth, ripening of the fruit and creating of seeds. So you can see that these all have their reflection in that level of existence. And other things. This one is down and gravity, the leaves are horizontal, the stem is vertical. Oops, we've got some rounding of fruit. Yeah, there's different things there. We don't have, you need to perhaps read these yourself and sort of, sort of work through those things. And in a sense, when a plant, it's very hard to say with a plant what it is by just studying the seed. You need to have a plant gradually expand and show itself right through to the fruit, and then you show the greatest diversity. You can identify plants. You need to go right through to that. So the plant butterfly symbiosis, and here you can see that the winter, the seed, the roots, and the egg of the plant, there's a kind of inner connection. In spring, the stem, the leaves, the caterpillar eats the leaves. And then in summer, the buds and the flowers of the plant and the chrysalis of the butterfly is the corresponding thing. It's not saying that all happens in summer, but I mean there's stages that are similar. And in autumn, the fruit, and then the imago, the actual butterfly itself, the final stage. So you have the fourfoldness, again, in that insect world, or the animal world. And here something to do with the consciousness. Here I'm trying to say that these have something of head form strongly within it. Here more the chest and the rhythmic system, and here these animals have the digestion and the limbs a characteristic within them. And the human being, of course, has all of those. Devolution. Yes, this is quite an interesting thing. That this is such an where does human being come from? Does the human being come from the ape, or does the ape come from the human being? And so this is a picture that's got by, say here, a book, a wonderful book, but it's long out of print. Herman Poppelbaum, Man and Animal, 1953. Someone's into publishing, that should be published again. So he gives a picture of the human being, as it were, approaching the earth from a spiritual world, gradually getting nearer, and as it were, all the animals and these creatures, you might say, are almost images of the human being, and some of them rush into physical manifestation. And so the very earliest things to come to the earth are minerals, then plants, then invertebrates, fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, lower mammals, quadruped mammals, primates, and then the human being, as it were. So as the human archetype is coming close to the earth, what appears in the world as though we're coming from the bottom end as a kind of meeting, which in a way is saying here that this human archetype, you might say all of this was a wonderful creative process of the spiritual worlds trying to create a body and circumstance for human beings to exist. It's a wonderful thing, that sort of absolute kind of creativity. You see, the gods had never made a human being before. They didn't know how to do it. But you can see what fun they had creating all these different possibilities. You might say, you tried this. No, that's not quite good enough. Try something. The huge variety in the animal world is like saying, now could they do this and that? You can see some have big heads, different organs. Some have different parts of the body, as it were, is explored in the different animals. And then you think, wow, what an incredibly creative process. You might say the creator gods had in gradually building a human body into which we can live and progress in a whole new level. Perhaps I just need to, oh no, I'll just show you the last two, just comparing skeletons. And you can look at those and see what's the difference between there. You know, here there's something of the human being is able to stand upright, and you can feel here this, well, they don't normally stand upright, there's more like this, but you can see that the primates are close to it, but you can feel their head is in like this, and then what happens to the human being? The human being can look to the heavens, can look around, and the head is free, and the hands are free, that they're not tied to the earth. And so there's a wonderful picture of just sort of out of that last stage of sort of not quite there, looking around, Adam. Okay, let's leave it there.